So, at that time in the teen years, there were some churches that we were going to, and the men were very militant Christian, and they would say flat out, I'd overhear them saying, "We need to get Elliot fixed because
Mm,
otherwise the homosexuals are going to get him."
mm,
And I would hear horrible things about gay people growing up. They were child molesters, they were grooming everybody. And I knew what I was, and I was thinking, oh my God, that's me. And
mm,
why are they talking about me like that? I don't do anything to kids. I would never do that. But I felt horrible. And we were really big in that church about revelations. Okay. So it's always the end is coming any
yeah.
moment.
Any
And I
moment.
remember being a kid and being on the bus and being terrified that I was going to hear this angel blast
Yeah.
and suddenly the rapture was going to happen and I would be judged and left behind and everyone else was going to go because I was this horrible, sinful, gay creature who
Yeah.
God just wanted to throw in an incinerator after I died because I didn't uh, get born the different way.
Yeah.
And I would think, why would you throw your people into an incinerator for
Yeah.
eternity? I mean, what
Yeah.
kind of sick thing is that?
That's what I love about tarot, and I've we could talk about this more in depth, but like I was always taught that it was, it's about reading the future. It's
Hmm.
about predicting what's gonna come. But what I found for
Hmm.
tarot is it's more putting a magnifying glass or maybe a spotlight on what's already there that
Yes.
maybe I'm not seeing because of whatever's going on in my life. But this archetype on the card comes up, and I'm able to kind of look at it, and it might through the lens of my life, and then see something that's been there the whole time. And now I'm like,
Hmm.
oh yes, like that's the answer I've been looking for. It's been there the whole time.
Yes. Yeah, it's amazing. 95% of the readings I do for the public now, after the reading, the person says, wow, you basically told me what I already know, but you more amplified something in me that now it's a lot more clear.
That's
So,
right.
absolutely. And, I'm not Tarot Moses. So,
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're joined by Elliot Adam. He's the author of two amazing books, Fearless Tarot and Tarot in Love. Both I highly recommend. So, Elliot, welcome to the podcast. I've really been looking forward to this conversation.
I have been looking forward to this too. Glenn, thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited to talk today.
Excellent. Thank you. So, first thing is first, maybe give us a snapshot of Elliot Adam, especially for people who are maybe new to you, your work. Who are you? How do you spend your days? What are you known
Sure.
for? Tell us what we need to know.
Okay. Well, I am Dr. Elliot Adam,
Mhm.
and I started the website elliotoracle.com, which has become really popular for tarot card meanings that aren't based on fear, but are more geared toward personal empowerment. So, a lot of us have seen movies where the fortune teller turns the dreaded death card over and it means something
Everybody
horrible is
freaks
about to
out. Oh
happen.
no.
Yes, exactly. And I found, I've been reading tarot since I was 16 years old for the public, and I found that when you terrify people, you're not really helping them. And tarot is a collection of symbolism. It's
Mhm,
not meant most of the time to be taken literally.
mhm,
And so, what the website does, and my books do, is take these tarot symbols and it puts it in a safe space to talk about what is this symbolizing in your life. Is the death card maybe symbolizing a death of an old way of life that's
mhm.
uncomfortable? And then once you can kind of start to dialogue with those cards on a deeper level, they can lead to a sense of empowerment or control over your life rather than feeling like some doomed, fated future is about to befall you.
That's one of the things I would highly recommend for our listeners to pick up Fearless Tarot because that's something that really helped me because I'm really new to tarot, like maybe a year and a half into it, but especially in those early weeks and months, I remember dreading like what happens if I pull the death card? You know, like what is that going to mean? But your book was one of the first ones that I picked up as like a companion guide for myself. And when I read your take on some of those scarier cards, even like a lot of the sword cards can be
Mhm.
very fearful because,
Yes.
there's like swords going through people and things like that. And I was like, what does
Yes.
all this mean? But you're able to kind of come in with this different look, put a different twist on it, which then I think taps into your own, like the reader's own intuition to maybe if you see something different in the card, then maybe you even say in the book and kind of go down a whole nother road that's more applicable to wherever the person is in their life.
Yeah, tarot, as I was saying, it's symbolism. And
Hmm.
so when we're looking at a scary card with knives in someone's back, what could that be symbolizing? Well, it could be a time in their life where they're feeling stabbed in the back or
Yep.
victimized by something. Or even when I looked at the Ten of Swords, which is the card we're talking about,
Hmm.
I looked at it almost like I was looking at a crime scene. And there's this guy with the swords in his back. And I thought, how did those swords get in his back? Well, he
Right.
must have been running away from them. He
Hmm.
must have been turning his back to them.
Yep.
And so then we take the symbolism and say, well, what are we turning our back to? What's making us uncomfortable? What are we being chased by in the shadows
That's
that's
right.
turning us into a victim?
That's right.
And then once we're able to identify that, well, then we can say, I'm going to make a different choice.
Hmm. Yeah, that's what I love about tarot, and I've we could talk about this more in depth, but like I was always taught that it was, it's about reading the future. It's
Hmm.
about predicting what's gonna come. But what I found for
Hmm.
tarot is it's more putting a magnifying glass or maybe a spotlight on what's already there that
Yes.
maybe I'm not seeing because of whatever's going on in my life. But this archetype on the card comes up, and I'm able to kind of look at it, and it might through the lens of my life, and then see something that's been there the whole time. And now I'm like,
Hmm.
oh yes, like that's the answer I've been looking for. It's been there the whole time.
Yes. Yeah, it's amazing. 95% of the readings I do for the public now, after the reading, the person says, wow, you basically told me what I already know,
Right.
but you more amplified something in me that now it's a lot more clear.
That's
So,
right.
absolutely. And, I'm not Tarot Moses, okay? So, I'm not coming off the mountain with the laws of how everyone has to interpret tarot. There are as many different tarot interpretations as there are readers, and
Yeah.
everyone dialogues with the symbolism in a unique way. So, I encourage people, take what works for you, leave the rest behind.
Yeah.
But this is something that really speaks to everybody on a very personal level.
Yeah. We share a similar background. You told me in our email exchange that you grew up in a very fundamentalist evangelical world, of which I did as well. And most of our listeners, I would say like 90% of our listeners come from that
Hmm.
universe as well. So I was hoping that we could begin there and see where the conversation takes us. Maybe talk to us about your spiritual journey, like where you were as a kid in
Hmm.
terms of your faith, what being raised in that world look like for you? Because even though we all share a similar system that we grew up in, the experience is kind of different for everybody. But kind of where you are
Hmm.
now, some of the highs and lows that brought you from there to here. Then we'll dive into the tarot stuff after that.
You bet. Well, thank you for that question. I have to, full disclosure, say that, this was a big question that I was actually afraid to talk about today. It
Mm,
really does stir up strong feelings from childhood. Some of them are a little traumatic,
hmm.
or a lot of traumatic. And
Mm,
I'm sure many of your listeners can relate to that because there is a very kind of rigid world that you're adhering to. There's not a lot of room for free thought or to go outside the lines. There is a sense as well that you have to stay true to this thing.
yeah.
So when I was young, even at 5 or 6 years old, I knew I was gay. I just
Mm,
knew I was. And I was raised in a very evangelical church. My uncle's a minister, and
hmm.
my grandparents were very involved in the church. And what they all had in common was that they were addicted to something before becoming Christian.
Mm,
So my uncle was addicted to drugs, and then
mm,
he got saved, and now he's addicted to the religion. And
mhm.
my grandpa was an alcoholic, and then he got saved, and then he's addicted to the religion. And so there was a sense of almost like a fervor here, like an addiction to, um, making this thing the full source of what alleviated their fears or their worries.
Yeah.
And they meant the best. I reflect on it now. When I was in my 20s, I was really angry about how I grew up. It really
Mm,
made me mad that I was holding signs with aborted, dismembered fetuses in front of a
mm,
judge's house before I even know how women got pregnant. I didn't even know the whole thing. And here I am in front of a judge's house at 6 years old, and people are taking my picture for the paper and I don't know what I'm doing there.
Yeah.
So there is a lot that it stirs up, and yet my grandfather wasn't a horrible person who was evil, and my uncle still to this day isn't a terrible man.
Hmm.
They just did what they could do was what they had.
Yep.
And so, as I went through adolescence, the ability to hide being gay was impossible for me.
Mm.
I open my mouth and a purse falls out of it. Most people can kind of just be quiet and get through it. Uh, so, at that time in the teen years, there were some churches that we were going to, and the men were very militant Christian. And they would say flat out, I'd overhear them saying, "We need to get Elliot fixed because
Mm.
otherwise the homosexuals are going to get him."
Mm.
And I would hear horrible things about gay people growing up. They were child molesters, they were grooming everybody. And I knew what I was, and I was thinking, oh my God, that's me. And
Mm.
why are they talking about me like that? I don't do anything to kids. I would never do that. But I felt horrible. And we were really big in that church about revelations. Okay. So it's always the end is coming any
Yeah.
moment.
Any
And I
moment.
remember being a kid and being on the bus and being terrified that I was going to hear this angel blast
Yeah.
and suddenly the rapture was going to happen and I would be judged and left behind and everyone else was going to go because I was this horrible, sinful gay creature who
Yeah.
God just wanted to throw in an incinerator after I died because I didn't uh, get born the different way.
Yeah.
And I would think, why would you throw your people into an incinerator for
Yeah.
eternity? I mean, what kind
Yeah.
of sick thing is that? But that's what the belief was.
Yeah.
So, luckily, at the same time that I was growing up, I also loved the library. And I
Yeah.
would go to the library and I was attracted to the mythology section.
Mm.
And I'd open the books and there would be these beautiful images of gods and goddesses, one of them being Athena, who carried an owl. And I always drew owls and I was always into that. And I used to think, wouldn't it be wonderful if a goddess like Athena was real, like the god in my uncle's church?
Mm.
Wouldn't it be so nice? What if I could have a goddess that actually understood me instead of be in a religion where I didn't even like the religious figures because they were mean?
Yeah.
They were just so cruel. And so, as things became untenable, my journey, I know I'm going through a long story, but when I was a teenager, as a gay kid, I thought of suicide multiple times.
Mm.
I thought there was no hope for me to be an upstanding, straight, how could I ever marry a woman and live a lie like that? And so I had a crisis moment. And it was around that time that I discovered tarot.
Mhm.
And I did learn more about the myths and the stories, and that I did start to get into symbolism more. And it gave me a voice. And
Mm.
suddenly I was doing tarot for people, and they were wanting to hear what I was saying. And then there I was at 16, working in a shop, and I'm helping people with their divorces and their where to invest in the stock market or whether to buy a property or not.
Yeah.
And I started to feel a purpose that was outside of that fear-based kind of world that I grew up in.
Yeah.
And it really did save my life,
Mhm.
and not because I have this zealous belief and now the symbolism I'm into and the interest, but it really did show me that I was very limited in my understanding of what's out there in the world,
Yeah.
and that there's all this knowledge, all this history that happens before 2000 years ago
That's right.
that people are just completely ignorant to. We think that the world started 2000 years ago. It didn't.
Yeah.
There is a whole history before that, and it's
Yeah.
fascinating to dive into.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us because, as I'm listening to you, there's so many, it's very different, like I said before, but there's so many different overlaps because, like, I'm listening,
Hmm.
you talk about the rapture. Like, I had this
Hmm.
horrible fear. I remember having nightmares when I was a kid about
Hmm.
being left behind or even worse, being taken, but my family left behind and, like,
Hmm.
reaching out for them as I'm being lifted up into the air. And, everybody's saying you have to be joyful now because, it's this is
Yeah.
what we've all been waiting for. And I mean, this is turmoil, but like being afraid to
Mhm,
talk to my parents about it because I was always afraid that, like, well, what if they don't believe the right things,
mhm,
but they just tell me they do believe the right things so that I'll calm down, but then they're really going to go to hell anyway. And then I'm a failed evangelist,
mhm,
which is like the worst thing you could
mhm,
possibly be. So
mhm,
wrestling with all of that stuff. But then we talked about, being gay. Like I can remember when I was a kid, I didn't know anybody who was out as gay, like,
mhm,
so I knew about it in theory, but nothing
mhm,
like in reality. And so even when I got into Bible college and seminary, we had to write, papers on the clobber verses in the Bible. So I could, exegete all these passages and do all this different
mhm,
stuff. And I could argue my case that, being gay is a sin. And that's where I was for the longest time. But then when I left the church, I started working for Apple. I was there for 11 years, working in
mhm,
a store with like 150 people in it. And now all of a sudden I'm meeting people who are gay, who are lesbian, who are transgender. I remember this one time where in our morning meeting, the manager said that one of our coworkers was going to be out for a few weeks having a procedure done. And when they came
mhm,
back, they'd have a different name and they would be he instead of she. And I was in my mind, like just blew my mind that like I knew this
mhm,
person, had spent time with this person, became friends with this person, and who they are is completely different than what I was told that they were growing up. And that created this
mhm,
theological crisis in my head that like I've been told all of this stuff about all these people, but none of it is matching up with the reality of now that I'm in a relationship with them. So as I got into
mm,
relationship with people, it bred empathy and understanding. And that just completely
mm,
changed my outlook on that aspect of my theology, but that leaked into other places as well because I thought to myself, well, if this piece of my theology needs to be rethought, what about all these other pieces as well that I've been handed?
mhm,
And that just took me down this crazy road that I'm on now where I'm talking to all these different people like yourself, but all
mhm,
these different kind of spiritual practices, religious practices that are way outside of that very narrow tradition that I was handed, that you were handed growing up.
mhm,
And I'm realizing that there's so many different ways to come into contact with the divine, and that
mhm.
small branch of evangelical Christianity does not hold the corner market on how things need to be done.
Yeah, they're actually quite a new phenomenon if you look at the yawning
Historically
breadth of
speaking.
history.
Right.
Absolutely. And that's kind of a comfort to me. What you made a point about is so important is that we really only do know what we know.
That's right.
If I were a straight person and I were raised in that community and I felt like I really belonged and not that I was going to get cast out or killed, maybe I would still be a Christian now.
Yep.
And still, an evangelical because I belong there and I wouldn't even have to think twice about it. And if all people were telling me is that these horrible homosexuals are out there and these trans people now are really, that's the new thing that
Yeah.
everyone's all in a hubbub about,
Yep.
um, you know, it's like it's so easy to demonize people, but also for us people who have become free of, feeling controlled by this, we also can't suddenly say, well, now all evangelical Christians are psychos
That's right.
who are completely horrible people
Yep.
and they're just trying to destroy us and our country and they're the enemy and they're evil because we're just as bad.
Yep.
As hard as it is, sometimes it's so important to sit down with people who have an opposite view of you. And
Yeah.
even in my own family, there are still evangelicals that I reach out with. My aunt, for example, she's still a very evangelical Christian. Her husband won't even talk to me. He won't even make eye contact with me. But she sneaks away and has lunch with me with my other aunt every month.
Yeah.
And you know, she's loving. And we don't talk about religion, and I don't try to proselytize to her or tell her what she needs to do. And she's, respectful enough with not kind of pouring too much onto me. But it gives her comfort. It gives
Yeah.
her life meaning. And so who am I to tell somebody that you can't do that?
That's so good. So, can you talk to us a little bit more about tarot entering into this picture? Because you talked about, finding all these books in the library, and then tarot kind of entering the picture, and then helping all these other people. And what was it like? I'm wondering, like for this to enter, like your soul, so to speak. Like, was there any kind of inner conflict going on
Oh
about like
God,
what
yeah.
you heard about tarot and your fundamentalist upbringing? Because a lot of our listeners are becoming really interested in tarot. We've had Stephanie Capone on the show,
Oh yeah,
Brittany Muller. Teresa
Yes.
Reed, Meg Wall. So we've had a lot of people kind of on talking about tarot. People are like really interested in it, but I've heard a lot of people say that like that internal Christian soldier from their youth
Mm,
kind of rises up and says, "Oh, this is dangerous stuff. Like you shouldn't listen
mhm.
to this kind of thing because it's going to take you down, that bad road." So even though they don't really think like that anymore, that voice is still kind of buried in there. So again, a little bit
Mhm.
about maybe how tarot came into your life and then that sort of wrestling match that was going on with the inner critic, if that happened.
You bet. So yeah, tarot entered my life at a time of great turmoil. So my mother, who was a very evangelical Christian, when I was younger, her evangelical husband ended up cheating on her at work, and there was this
Mm,
messy divorce, and then we were poor suddenly, and I'm on food stamps, and and she got a new boyfriend who was the complete opposite. My mom kind of, what the Christians would call backslid. And she found herself, with a guy who owned a liquor store. And he had a house with all these antiques, and we were all displaced. So I
mm,
moved in with my mother again. And we moved in with this man who she was dating, who
mm.
was nice, but he had an attic full of antiques. And I went up there and I'm looking in the attics and there's crystal balls and there's like these taxidermy animals. It's like the never ending story attic. And then I find a deck of tarot cards and I
Mm,
thought, whoa, what are these? So I'm
yeah,
looking through the images and I'm seeing the Queen of Wands and I'm thinking, who's the Queen of Wands? She looks just like the princesses and the fairy tales I loved growing up.
yeah,
Ooh, and what's the justice figure? And ooh, this is interesting. I immediately connected with these symbols and I wanted to learn about them. I wanted to just get to know them. And so, I must have been about 15, 14, and I'm just kind of going through them. So then my brother, who was in the service at that time, he went to Germany and he came back on a furlough or on a break, and he heard Elliot got into tarot cards, and another relative of mine threw my tarot cards away
mm,
because she thought that they were dangerous and my soul was at risk, and this is bad stuff. So he said, Elliot, if you don't tell anybody, I'll take you to a store downtown and we'll buy you a new tarot deck and I'll get you a book so you can learn about it.
wow.
And I said, well, come on. So then I got to go to the store and there were all these decks on the wall. And I was like a kid in a candy store, like, oh my gosh, which one am I going to pick? And so I picked the one that I liked. It was the Connolly deck. It was
Mm,
really a good choice for me because the symbolism's less scary. So then I just voraciously studied this, got into it. And I was bullied as a kid for being a gay kid, not
mm,
just by Christians, I mean, by everybody at school, anywhere I went.
mhm,
And yet, when I started doing tarot, and I also played the oboe, so I, kind of was in the band room all the time doing little readings for people.
mm,
Suddenly, I became a little more popular, and people wanted to hear what I had to say, and were inviting me to parties. And
mm,
uh, then a shop heard about me in the city I was living in, and then the lady said, "Would you give me a reading?" And I did, and she said, "Holy crap! You need to do readings at this fair I'm doing this weekend. Wait till people see you." And then there I was at 16, and it just took over. And then I worked at another shop, and then that shop closed. Then I opened my own shop when I was 20. But here's the thing about tarot, I got away from the religious sphere of it just because it felt like what I'm doing isn't scary. I'm not,
yeah.
dooming anybody with terrible things. I'm helping them.
Mhm,
But there was a stigma with the tarot, not just with religious people, but with the public in general. This
yeah.
was the 90s, and Miss Cleo was on TV, and she'd call me down for your free tarot reading, And so I was a joke,
Yeah.
I'd go to parties, and people would say, "Well, Stan is a dentist, and Martha, she's going for her journalism degree. What do you do, Elliot?" And I'd say, "Well, I read tarot cards at this shop that I opened," and "Oh, that's weird."
Mm,
That's really scary or that's unacceptable. And so I really felt like a weird person there too. And so, I know this is long winded, but I also played the oboe and I was taking lessons at the Conservatory of Music. And the teacher there said, Elliot, you're 25. If you don't get into college now, you might not ever do it.
mm,
And so you need to do something more legitimate. So I went to music school and stayed there for the next 13 years and kind of kept tarot a secret, but still
mhm,
did it. And yeah, it wasn't until 2017 that I actually came back to the tarot for a whole other long-winded story.
Wow. Yeah. So you owned your own shop. So was it like a when you say that, like I'm trying to pick, or you just would you do tarot readings in the shop? Did you sell tarot cards like the shop that you went into when you were a kid? Like what was the shop
Absolutely.
like?
Yeah, it was called Athena's Oracle.
Mhm.
And I did sell things and I did do readings, but it was really a time of my life where I didn't know anything about business. I was only 20 when
Right.
I opened the store. And so I made all sorts of mistakes about
Yeah.
finances and how to save and all of this sort of thing. And I was kind of just living hand to mouth. And I was really wanting to sell tarot decks and incense and make that the big thing
Hmm.
because doing tarot readings is hard work. But people didn't want to buy that stuff from me. They wanted my readings.
Yeah.
And so I would have, just person after person after person. It was like a mill.
That's
And
crazy.
so I kind of got a little burnt out from that
Mm.
too. It was a lot. And also with tarot readings, sometimes as a reader, you're dealing with people not when they're happy and empowered and doing well. They're calling you when they're going through a crisis.
Yeah.
And you really do need some strong boundaries with when can this person get in touch with you? Are they calling you at midnight panicking about the abusive boyfriend, or how accessible are you? And
Yeah.
I had to learn really hard that you can't just be open to people. It was starting to make me feel like super anxious,
Mhm.
worried about leaving the house. Just, I was taking on way too much from other people at the time.
Yeah. Wow. So what would you say to people who are in the kind of situation that you were in, feeling like, what they were told about tarot versus maybe what their experience is like dabbling in it now, kind of wrestling with that internal soldier? Because again, I've had people reach out and say, like, I'm interested in these episodes. I kind of want to go get my own deck. I'm kind of afraid because I don't know a lot
Hmm.
about it and like things like that. Like, what would you say to help calm that inner voice a little bit so people can maybe take a step into these waters without being so afraid?
Well, what I would say is that tarot is a language of symbols,
Mhm.
and symbols are our first language. We've been dialoguing with these symbols since we've been painting images on the cave walls.
Right.
These are old, and they don't talk to something satanic in you. They talk to something in humankind that is old. It is on the walls of the cave. It is hieroglyphics. It
Yep.
is pictures. And our inner self, it doesn't speak a literal language of quotations of Bible verses, for
Mhm.
example. It speaks a language of imagery and symbolism. And what the symbols do is they kind of have you engage in a deeper part of yourself, which
Yep.
is below the level of fear. A
Yep.
lot of people say, turn within. That's where the answer is. And we turn within, and the first thing we're met with is a fear
Right.
or a judge or
Yep.
a really mean creature living there. And what tarot kind of dialogues with is the part of you that's even below that part.
Mhm.
It's older, it's clearer, it's
Yep.
instinctive.
Yep.
And it's the same as listening to music on the radio
Mhm.
and hearing a message, and you're like, this singer is singing my song. This is totally what I'm going through. It's that same kind of level. It's pictures. And if we're not taking our pictures literally, generally speaking,
Yep.
they can really be healing.
Yep.
And so, just as you wouldn't want to close your mind off to all music, I wouldn't close yourself off to learning about tarot necessarily. However, if you're terrified of it and you're not ready to learn tarot, then you're just not ready. And
Yep.
that's okay.
No
And you
pressure.
know what? You can go through your whole life and never read tarot, and you're going to be a perfectly fine human being.
Yep.
Don't listen to me as like this person who's trying to make you do tarot. It's
You're not the
it's
tarot
something that
fundamentalist, right?
no, I'm the opposite of that. And it's kind of interesting, even tarot has its share of fundamentalists. When I wrote my blog, for example, or even my book, Fearless Tarot, it wasn't endorsed by a lot of tarot readers at the time because it went against these meanings that people have been really hooked on, which is
Yeah.
like, oh, the Nine of Swords means death, destruction, ruin, and despair. How can you tell me that it means something different than that? I
Yeah.
get angry people writing messages to me. They weren't Christian. They were just people who really believed that tarot cards were this sort of meaning. And
Yeah.
it's all the same stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just this baggage people do because they're afraid.
That's right.
They're scared.
That's
And
right.
what people are scared of, they attack. and they don't want to get to know more.
Yeah.
And I would just say, if you have courage, sometimes it's interesting to listen to a different perspective and, still know who you are, still have a strong sense of, what, maybe that's not for me, but
Yeah.
I'm going to hear it out or I'm going to actually explore this myself and make an informed judgment instead of just listening to people who think like me or thought like me and get brainwashed and corralled like cattle into something that's, not really empowering for me.
Yeah. I love what you said about, different meanings. That's what I feel like tarot's done for me is like in the beginning, like first couple weeks, months, I was, glued to like a book. And
Mm,
then, I let kind of decide I'm gonna leave the book on the shelf and just gonna sit
mhm,
with these cards and see what comes to mind. And I found myself like that inner intuitive voice being a little
mhm,
bit more clear when I was able to kind of listen to it. Because when I was looking at these cards, like as someone who grew up in the church and I went to Bible college, I went to seminary, I see so many overlaps between the stories of the cards and the
mhm.
stories of the Bible. Because when I look at the Bible
Absolutely.
nowadays, I look at the Bible, I'm like, this isn't like God sat down in Starbucks and wrote this book and sent it off to a publisher, but these are
Yes.
stories that people have written that the big question is not so much like what does this mean, but why has this story been around for 2, 3, 4,000 years where it's still on
Mhm,
my shelf? What it is about this story that speaks to the core of our humanity. And that's what I'm seeing in the
mhm,
cards as well, is that there's a lot of overlaps between those stories and the stories on the cards, which has helped really drop my guard a little bit. And I've been able to kind of see some different parallels again in the cards. And so like, this one example I have is I forget what card it is. You're gonna know it. It's a guy who's carrying all of these swords and he's walking away from something. I forget which card it is, but he's carrying swords. Which card is that? Do you know off the
well,
top of your
there's a
head?
couple, like, there's the Seven of Swords, that one's kind of, like, a little more sneaky looking, that's a thief on there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what deck you're working with too, because there's
It
so
might have
many
been
different
that one.
ones.
I think it was that one because the meaning in the book was it was about a thief. But in
Yes.
me inside it spoke. I felt like it said the voice inside said, "You're always carrying everybody else's swords, and you have no
Mm.
room to carry your own stuff. And sometimes you have to put down other
Mm.
people's swords so you can have some room
Mhm.
in the palms of your hands to carry your own stuff." And for me, growing up in a church, like as a studying to be a pastor, was always about everybody else's needs or before my own, especially like the
Yeah,
church and God. And
yeah.
you got to raise money, you got to preach every week, you got to be present for everybody. It was so easy
Mhm,
to stuff away my own feelings, my own grief, my own sword, so
mhm.
I could carry everybody else's stuff. And I felt like that voice said, "You've got to make space, especially in this time of grief after losing my father. You've got to carry your own stuff for a while." And so that's
Yeah,
what that voice said
yeah,
to me about that card. But it was very different from what I saw in any of the books. But yet, for whatever
sure.
reason, the spirit, the divine, my inner self, whatever, said, "This is what it means for you in this moment."
That's a brilliant way to show how tarot can really dialogue with something deep in you that has a very healing message, and it's not coming from some mystical spirit. It's coming from you. It's
Right.
coming from you engaging with that symbol. And I think I know what card you're talking. I think it's the Five of Swords.
Maybe.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
probably would be that one. But yeah, I think that that's a brilliant way to dialogue with it. And people get so stuck in their books and their meanings and their how do I memorize this? Like, tarot cards aren't like monolithic symbols that mean the same thing every time you pick it, and you
Yeah.
just have to recall the memorized version of the card. And that, no, it's dynamic. It changes based on the context of the situation. It
Yeah.
changes based on the question you're asking or the thing you're seeking. So yes, I think that's brilliant how you described that maybe what you were feeling was a little different than what
Yeah.
you were seeing.
That's right. That's right. What advice do you have for people in terms of kind of good segue into like knowing the meanings of the cards for themselves? Like, especially I think of like the king and the queen and the knights
Mhm,
and the pages, like they're all obviously different in the different suits, but a lot of
mhm,
them look very similar, right? Because all the knights are on horses and
mhm,
sometimes it's moving, sometimes it's not. But the kings and the queens, they're
mhm,
typically on thrones. Like,
mhm.
and if you look at them, they can all look the same. And sometimes when I'm
Yes.
doing my own tarot stuff, like I dread pulling one of those. I'm like, oh, it's the same. It looks like it's the same as the all the other ones, but I know
Yes.
that they're all different. So, like, what are your thoughts about how somebody can get familiar with these different cards and their meanings and what it means to them?
Well, I think any tarot card, first off, tarot is not just a collection of symbolism, it's a collection of characters.
Hmm.
And when we start to get to know each character, it's like knowing characters in a play. They're very different and they
Hmm.
have very distinctive traits to them.
Hmm.
One of the helpers with the court cards that you're talking about is that they're all holding something different. One holds a cup, one holds a
Hmm.
sword, one holds a coin, one holds a wand. And those symbols, the cup, it'll represent emotions or feelings. It's the element of water. So right away, we're going to attribute that to the characters in the court cards of the cup suit. They're sensitive. They feel things deeply.
Hmm.
And you get to start to know, oh, well, who do I know that's like that? Maybe a younger person who's really sensitive, the Page of Cups,
Yeah.
who's really creative, but cries really easily or is so sensitive. They take everything so personally.
Mm.
Then you start to say, oh, I know these people as characters, but also they're in you. So, like I said, you don't want to go through the tarot and say, Page of Wands means an aspirational youth with red hair, and he is super creative with, talent and he's active. No, you want to start saying, who is this in me? What part
Mm.
of me is associated with talent? What part of me feels inspired? Look at what they're doing. In the case of the Page of Wands, he's holding a big staff in front of him. It's a lot taller than he is. It's like a measuring rod, and
Mm.
he hasn't quite grown into it. And that's a symbol for like kind of growing into something still, something that you're
Mm.
passionate about. But his head is upturned, so he's optimistic.
Yeah.
So sometimes court cards can be you, sometimes they can be other people, sometimes they can be a situation.
Mm.
It's important that you're just kind of perceiving them based on how you're feeling at the time and really look at what's happening in the picture.
Mm.
A lot of us dismiss things. We're like, oh, they're sitting in a throne, they're all doing the same thing.
Right.
No, they're not. Look closer.
Yeah.
Spend a little more time with that card, puzzle over it, chew on it a little bit.
Mm.
There's all sorts of things happening. There's little symbols in the card, animals in the background.
Mhm.
Maybe the cup that the queen is holding looks different than the other cups in the suit. What's on the cups? Oh, there's angels. It looks like the Ark of the Covenant. Ooh, what
Mm.
could that mean? There's all sorts of things to kind of go into on a deeper level. And
Mm.
I think if there's one critique I have for tarot readers in general is they're very dismissive with the symbolism. They're like, oh, it's Eight of Swords. It's bad. It's my memorized thing. I'm not even going to look at the picture. It's like I'm just going through flashcards.
Yep.
Look at the picture. There's a
Yeah.
lot more going on there.
Yeah. And I find it helpful too that to take like the cards in the different suits and put them side by side, right? Like if you take the
Hmm.
King of Wands and the King of Pentacles and you put them side by side, it's easier, I think, for me anyway, to be able to see the differences as opposed to remembering that I pulled this card maybe a week ago and now I'm pulling this card and to see I don't say anything different because I don't have it in front of my
Yes.
face. But if I put it, okay, I pulled this one today. Let me take out these other kings and put them side by side so I can see
Yeah.
what exactly this guy is different from these other ones and why what's going on in the background of this one that's not going on in the background of that one. That's helped me become a little bit more familiar, with those cards.
That's brilliant. And I love that comparing and contrasting and kind of looking at what else is there. And you make a really good point about a lot of the court cards because there isn't a lot that they're actively doing. They're not action cards.
Hmm.
Whereas the minor arcana cards and even some of the majors, there's people are doing things in the cards.
Yeah.
With the court cards, they're just kind of sitting there or standing there.
Yeah.
And so it is important to look at the background. In the case of the Rider Waite Smith tarot, and we got the King of Swords, what's in the background there? Well, there's two birds in the
Mm-hmm.
background, and one is flying markedly on top of the other.
Mm-hmm.
And what that can be a symbol for is that this king likes to dominate.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to be on top. He wants
Mm-hmm.
to be the one that's top bird here. The Queen of Swords, she only has one bird behind her. She likes to be alone. She
Mm-hmm.
likes to think on her own. She likes power for herself. She's not someone who is very feely and involved with others. So there's all sorts of little clues kind of going on with the animals, with the symbolism that can give you clues into, well, what is this card speaking to with me?
What can you tell me about about spreads, talking about like different cards being side by side? Because That's
Mhm.
something I got when I open up a tarot book and I go to the section about spreads, I get immediately overwhelmed because there's
Yes.
the Celtic cross spread that has like
Mhm.
30 cards in it, and then there's like all these other spreads that are like maybe 3 cards, 4 cards, 5 cards. Like, do you use spreads like in your own tarot practice, number 1, and then number 2,
Yeah.
like what would you tell listeners about spreads? Like, is there a good one for beginners? Is there one maybe to start with?
Sure.
What does that look like?
Well, for spreads, if tarot and the symbolism is the soul of a reading,
Mhm.
spreads are the skeletal system.
Mm.
They organize the information. The wonderful thing about a spread is not to get overwhelmed by how many cards are and what do they all mean. It's more about the card in that position. The spread is now limiting what that card is pertaining to.
Mm.
So you're not just having 10 random symbols in front of you and you're like, what the heck is all this about? It's almost like
Yeah.
they don't even agree. This is a way to organize the information
Mm.
so that it's like, oh, well, it's appearing in this part of the spread that has to do with the past. So I already know that whatever this symbol is talking about, it's talking about the past. It's
Mhm.
not happening right now. It's not something I need to worry about at the moment. It's something that's being recalled from the past. And now I can look at the symbol and start to interpret it through the lens of the past.
Yep.
So it's
Yep.
a way to kind of organize the information. Now, tarot spreads can be overwhelming for beginners. They were for me when I started.
Mhm.
And so, what I suggest is if you're just learning tarot, I would just start with a one card spread, a daily card in the morning that you pick. Maybe you get a journal out and you start to write what you're noticing on the card.
Mhm.
And then maybe at the end of the night, you kind of go back and you see how your day went.
Yep.
And where did that symbolism show up in your life? And now there's personal connections you're making to it. And then I would also just kind of read several different sources on authors who think, oh, this person says the
Yep.
King of Swords means this, but this one says this. Ooh, that's
Yep.
interesting. And which one do I think really pertains to my situation today?
Mhm.
So, spreads that could be something that you kind of get a little more advanced to do.
Yep.
And it's not uncommon for beginning tarot readers to have their little book with them
Yep.
and they got the
I
spread in
always
front of them and they're looking at the diagram and they're kind of going back and forth. That's how you learn. I mean, it's
Yep.
totally fine. You'll find in time, though, that the more you work with the symbolism, the more they sort of speak to you in a very unique way
Yep.
so that you don't need the book anymore and you kind of remember the structure of the spread so well. And maybe your intuition's even telling you, yeah, the spread says the card should be this, but I'm actually feeling that. Always go with the feeling,
Yep.
because these are just arbitrary external things we're trying to do to make a very symbolic, almost magical, intuitive thing make
Yeah.
logical sense. And these
Right.
are two different realms. The logical brain isn't the same brain that we're always engaging in when we're in the intuitive brain.
That's right. Yeah, it's been hard for me because you can tell by all the books behind me, I'm a thinker,
Yes.
and so
Yes.
getting into tarot was very challenging for me for that reason because I wanted to get the books, I wanted to study the meanings, I wanted to know what they meant, and it was so overwhelming to me because I'm also that
Yes.
person that wants to master something very quickly,
Yes.
and I was getting very frustrated. I'm like, all these stupid pictures look
Mhm.
the same, and like all these different. I was getting so angry with it, and now I've had listeners tell me like the same thing, and in talking to people, we've come to this conclusion that like it's not for those of us who grew up in the church, we didn't learn the Bible overnight. It took us a long
Oh
time, a
God, no.
lifelong journey of learning all these stories and all these meanings. And it's a never ending journey. And the same thing is with tarot. It's like we're learning a new language that's very similar
Mhm.
to other languages that we speak. But at the same time, there's no rush in having to master it. You've got to work with it. For those of us that grew up in the church, we had our morning devotion where we'd sit with our Bible every morning and we would read it. You can have
Mhm.
you can take that same practice into tarot. Like you just said, you could sit with a card in the morning over your coffee. You could write about it. You can journal about it. If you still do your Bible thing, you can see, well, does this overlap into anything I know about in the Bible? And you can include that into your journal. And over time, when you do that more and more, like you said, I think you get more and more familiar with the cards, more and more comfortable
Mhm.
with it. And then your own meanings start to develop, as well. And you can go back to your own journal as opposed to going into books all the time, go back and say, oh, 6 weeks ago, I pulled this card and this is what I thought about it. And
Yes.
today I see the same thing, but maybe I see something different in the card. Maybe I see something a little bit that's speaking into a different situation in my life right now. So I think that's wonderful advice.
And you will see something different.
That's right.
Every time. It's so interesting. I've been doing this for almost 25 years and I'm still picking out symbolism or even listening to other readers who have a take on something and I'm like, "Holy smokes, I never thought about that. That's
Yeah.
brilliant. I can't believe what they just suggested for that card."
Yep.
Everybody engages with these symbols in a different way and even we ourselves as we come back to them, we come with new wisdom, new
Yep.
insights, new life experiences that really make it a lot richer. And you are not alone with wanting to figure out the meanings and have the exact true one right way
Yep.
of reading tarot. Everybody kind of goes through that. And what you find is like, hey, it doesn't really stick in that kind of part of the brain.
Yep.
It's a little disconcerting for people who do want that certainty of like this means this every time, all the time.
Yep.
Even clients I have, they get really stuck on, well, I pulled this card and now you're saying this. So like, and it's like, calm down. This is just, this is how this stuff works. It's
Yep.
it's very contradictory.
Yeah. All right. Last question for you. What does your tarot practice look like? Like in your everyday life? Like take us into like a
Sure.
quick walkthrough of how tarot plays into you because I know what you do on Instagram. I think it's brilliant when you do your card pulls for people. We know what you do for other people. But like when the camera's off, the doors are closed, it's you in your house. What does your tarot practice look like? Do you go to the cards multiple times a day? Is it kind of once a day? Like what's it look like for you?
Yeah. So for me, tarot is my work.
Hmm.
So when I get off this podcast interview with you, I have 6 clients that I'm going to be reading all afternoon,
Wow.
and we're going to go into all of their stuff. And
Yep.
sometimes at the end of the day, I'm so tired that I'm just like, I don't want to pick any more
No
cards
more
because I've
tarot.
just done this all day long, and
Right.
uh, but in the mornings, I do my daily rituals and my prayer work, and then I pick a card out of different oracle decks, and I might even pick a tarot card that day
Mm,
just to kind of have something to reflect on or meditate on. But the big thing that I've been with in the last, especially recently, so for 25 years, I've been drawing a tarot deck based on ancient Greek mythology. And I finished it at least 7 times and gone back and hated the art and then redid it. And so I've been
right.
in this spiral. Well, this is the year, knock on wood, but I got a patron who's funded it. And so she's actually sending me to Greece to
Oh,
write
wow.
all the chapters and go to the old temples and
Wow.
do some social media things in front of the Greek temples, and I'll kind of tie it into the cards and all of that. So right now, my daily practice when I'm not reading cards is drawing them and
Yeah.
trying to get this deck finished
Wow.
in time for the summer. So that's kind of where my daily practice is. But yes, I still do pick cards every day,
Yep.
maybe in the morning, but I do not. There's a wonderful saying that tarot is an excellent servant, but a horrible master.
Mm,
So, what I mean by that is that if the cards are serving you to make decisions and aid you in something, they're wonderful. They
yeah.
can really point out your blind spot. But if you make a deck of cards your master and you can't make a life decision without running to your tarot deck and picking a card, and oh no, it looks bad, so I can't do that.
Yep.
This can really trigger anxiety. It can almost turn to a mania. I used to call them tarot junkies. Like they're just like, oh, well, quick question, pull a card.
Another
I
hit,
need
need
to
another
know.
hit, right?
I had people who'd be like, Elliot, I'm at the mattress store. Should I get the Sealy Posturepedic
Oh,
mattress or
no.
the other? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you
Right. Take a
can't pick
deep
a
breath.
mattress without picking a card? I mean, give
Right.
me a break. So, it's important that you're kind of keeping it in context that it's an aid to you.
Yeah.
It's something to help support you in your life, but it isn't your master. It isn't something that you need to give all your power to.
Yeah. That's such good advice. All right. Close us out if you could with a tarot reading of sorts. If you could pull a card on behalf of our listeners, give us a
Sure.
fearless, fearless tarot. Oh, there you go. Word of encouragement.
Well, I just picked the Page of Pentacles. And speaking of court cards and how they all look the same, well, here's the Page of Pentacles, and I'll
Yep.
describe it to your listeners. We got a young man. He's got a red cap on, and
Mhm.
he's holding a coin. And even though he's a child of the earth element, meaning he's practical, he's a hard worker, he wants to get things done, he's very literal.
Mhm.
His head's kind of in the clouds on this card. And the red cap is a symbol for his passion, following what he loves. The Page of Pentacles is the student of the tarot.
Mm.
And everyone listening is a student in their own way. And what this card really encourages you to do is learn about what you're passionate about. It may not be what I'm passionate about or Glenn's passionate about.
Yeah.
It might be something that you really just come alive and you just love this so much. The Page of Pentacles is telling you that it's never a mistake to learn more, that it
Wow.
makes your life richer. And so this is a card as well of not just learning new things, but manifesting something wonderful with what you're learning.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just read
Mm.
books and pontificate about this alone in a room. The Page of Pentacles affects change in the external world with what he's learned. And so, for everybody who's a student in something, you're going to be a teacher in time. And it's important to share what you know.
Wow. Elliot, my friend, we're out of time, but this has been amazing. And what a way to end it, because like you said, we are all students, and there's so many people, so many listeners are really trying to learn, get into this world. And I think that's just a beautiful reminder for us all. So thank you for your
Well,
time.
thank you.
Thank you for your work. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Well, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And for any of you who are interested in finding me, I'm on YouTube, Elliot Oracle, or Instagram, Elliot Oracle. And I got tons of free content on my website, elliotoracle.com. So if you're stumped with a tarot meaning or you're really scared of a certain card, just type in 10 of Swords Elliot online, and I'll be the first result. And it'll lead you to a free blog that you can read and a little video clip. In under a minute, I'll describe that card to you.
That's right. Awesome. I'll put the links in the show notes, and maybe we can do this again sometime.
Well, that'd be wonderful. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to talk to a very like minded person with a history that's so similar to my own.
Thank you too.